So in this video, we're going to be talking about the aftermath of Julius Caesar's death and the struggle to succeed him on behalf of the two populist warlords left standing, Antony and Octavian. So in the aftermath of Julius Caesar's death, we have two possible successors, each of whom has their merits, and neither of whom is the complete package, which is in a situation where it could potentially divide and weaken the populist movement, at its moment of supremacy. So on the one hand, we have Marcus Antonius, who is Julius Caesar's right-hand man. He has extensive experience. He's an able general, although he hasn't really been in a situation to demonstrate his independent military leadership. And he has been the agent of Julius Caesar's policies. He is political and savvy. He knows his way around the system, but he has very little in the way of popularity. He doesn't actually inspire loyalty or trust or love. He always seems to have an angle on things and to be, looking around corners for his own benefit. He comes across as somebody who is Caesar's man because that's something that's beneficial to Mark Antony. Moreover, people have had experience of Antony as Caesar's fixer while Caesar was away for most of his, the period after the Rubicon, the 5 years after the Rubicon. Most of that time, Julius Caesar is away, and Antony is the one that's in Rome actually managing things, and he does very little to endear himself to anybody. He's crass and brusque and off-putting. Antony would seem to be the logical choice for a direct successor to Julius Caesar, but in fact, what Caesar has done is name his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, as his adoptive son and heir in his will. And so at this point, this callow, inexperienced youth is handpicked by Julius Caesar to be his successor. And so he becomes, due to the rules of Roman adoption, he takes the name of his adoptive father. He becomes Gaius Julius Caesar, with his old name added on as a cognomen. So he becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. And in English history written in English, that is, he's always referred to as Octavian during this period, since the title Augustus doesn't come to him until later. He's referred to as Octavian. The Romans often referred to him as young Caesar. And this is the context in which we find ourselves hearing about him in things like the letters from Cicero, which is what we see in this reading. What comes across here in particular is that Octavian is an unknown and an untried subject, and the politicians in Rome, Antony and Cicero and everyone else, feel as though this is an opportunity to bend, Caesar's following in a direction. If they can manage young Caesar, then this will allow the people that Caesar's crowded out to steer things into a new direction, more to their liking. And so everybody is looking to manipulate young Caesar, not knowing yet that even though he is inexperienced, he's not somebody that is amenable to this kind of management. The main point to remember here is that Octavian is the heir of Caesar, not just in terms of property, but remember how we were talking about Marius. His role in Rome is as a private person. The faith and trust that's invested in Marius is invested in him personally as a man. And that's something, that role and that responsibility that sort of like Atlas-like role Marius passes on to his personal private heir, Julius Caesar, who then rises to take on that role, to grows into that position as a general, as a leader, as somebody who is worthy of that faith and trust, who takes on that Atlas-like role, who becomes the focal point as a direct successor to Marius. And this is where Octavian is now. Octavian is the heir to Caesar, not simply in terms of private property, but in terms of his position, his place in the Roman consciousness. He is his cultural, social, and military heir. And Octavian is now in the position of rising into that and demonstrating his worthiness to be that focal point, to be that atlas, to be the repository of the faith and trust of the Roman citizens and army. And so what happens in the wake of Caesar's death is the so-called liberators, the assassins of Julius Caesar, expected the republic to be fully restored and the Rome to return to the governance of 2 consuls and 6 praetors, and for everything to roll back to the way it had been 100 years ago. But the republic isn't working. The republic, as it is, might be functional as a governance for the city-state of Rome, but even this is broken down and failed because the systems and the systems and institutions of the Republican government have lost the faith and trust of the people. The people have placed their faith and trust in individuals that have demonstrated their capacity to be champions. The populist movement is won. The republic has failed. And so what replaces Julius Caesar is a new form of strongman government. But because there are 2 successors, this is done jointly. And in order not to give too much power to these 2 individuals, we actually have a triumvirate, that rules Rome together. And the difference here is we talked earlier about a so-called first triumvirate, back before Rubicon, that was Crassus and Pompey and Caesar. That was different from this. That was unofficial, behind-the-scenes manipulation of 3 very powerful men who were pulling levers and manipulating things behind the scenes in order to get what they wanted, and generating all the power and influence that they could leverage behind the scenes. This is the triumvirate of 43 to 36 is the official government of Rome. This is a government that has essentially replaced the old system and now invests formal imperium and administrative responsibility in the place of these 3 men, not in place of the consuls, but above them. And so we have the 2 successors to Julius Caesar, his right-hand man, Antony, and his actual heir, Octavian. And there's a 3rd individual who's in here for one particular reason. Lepidus has no power base. He has no reason to be included into a group like this, except for the fact that he is now Pontifex Maximus. And so Lepidus is in control of the apparatus of the state religion. and therefore allows the triumvirate to get done things not only in terms of political law, but in terms of religious law, and therefore completely control the Roman system. As a demonstration of their authority, they undertake, another round of proscriptions to eliminate men who are potentially going to cause them problems. And there are a number of people that are included in this that are distinguished individuals that are likely to be intolerant of or in rivalry with the triumvirate for demonstrating power over Rome. One of these is Cicero, and supposedly it's Antony who insists upon the proscription of Cicero as a means of retaliation for Cicero having backed away from Julius Caesar, and for slights against Antony while the two of them were in Rome while Caesar was away. The point is that proscriptions are something that the Roman history is associated with Sulla, and makes Sulla out to be a monster for, but the prescriptions were invented by the populares. Marius does it. Marius Jr. does it, and the triumvirs do it. This wholesale slaughter is officially sanctioned because remember this is the official government of Rome, and this is officially sanctioned political slaughter on behalf of Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. The first order of business is to kill not just their enemies at Rome, but their enemies that have fled Rome after assassinating Julius Caesar and, to their shock, not seeing the Republic restored. Cassius and Brutus and their forces have gone to Greece, and so Antony and Octavian put together their own legions to chase after the liberators, and eventually the liberators are defeated at Philippi. Antony makes a great deal of propaganda out of the fact that Octavian was sick in his tent during Philippi, but there's plenty of stories on Octavian's behalf as well. Visitations by Julius Caesar and so forth. The point is that Cassius and Brutus and everything that they stood for, everything the Optimates have stood for, are completely and utterly dead. One of the things that is in play now is who's going to support whom, and the Octavian, with his lack of military experience and the medical problems that he's experiencing during this time, is particularly vulnerable on the military front, but he has the support of generals of immense capability. One of the men that makes it possible for him to be successful is Marcus Agrippa. Marcus Agrippa becomes the Octavian's particular lieutenant and the architect of his military success in the early years. He's older. He's pragmatic. He's extremely skilled tactically and strategically, and less prone to emotional reaction than Antony. He's very stalwart and stone-faced. Marcus Agrippa is the rock on which Octavian's success is built. What we end up with after Philippi is that Antony and Octavian essentially move out of each other's way as a means of attempting to preserve the peace. And so Antony goes off to the east in order to organize affairs there, and this is particularly in the face of the threat of the Parthians that Caesar had been about to embark against before his death. And so he proceeds first to the Roman provinces in the east and then to Egypt in order to build up the possibility of of support there. Meanwhile, Octavian stays in the West, in Rome, and what we have is essentially, two separate spheres of influence in which the two triumvirs are more or less operating independently, but with mutual hostility, with a long-term goal of eliminating this awkward arrangement of having to share power with each other despite having nothing in common. While Antony is in Egypt, he is in contact with and becomes involved with the Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra the Seventh, the what turns out to be the last of the Hellenistic monarchs of Egypt. Julius Caesar, of course, had also been intimately associated with Cleopatra, and his plan for Egypt was very straightforward. He, conducted a relationship with Cleopatra, the result of which was a son, Caesarion, who would be a Roman pharaoh of Egypt. And this was a very neat way of dealing with the problem of Egypt being very difficult to conquer because of its great wealth. So the plan was, Julius Caesar's plan was, the next generation, Egypt would be a very special kind of Roman client kingdom under the control of Caesarion, the Romano-Egyptian, Ptolemaic amalgam, would be a very Hellenistic way of approaching the completion of the Roman Empire. But all this comes to be set aside once Caesar is dead, and the future is now uncertain. So Cleopatra needs to shore up her, balanced relationship with the Romans by making friends with Mark Antony, and as it turns out, Mark Antony is susceptible to Cleopatra's charms. The story as we have it is essentially Mark Antony falls in love with Cleopatra, which Cleopatra uses to her benefit in order to stave off the conquest of the Romans, which would definitely come with Antony's rival Octavian. So there's a few problems with this. Antony becomes more and more involved with Cleopatra. They end up getting married, and they have children. Antony starts to think more and more in terms of Egypt as a focal point for power, which is reasonable in the sense that power in the ancient world has always been in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Egypt is far older than any of the other kingdoms of the world. Certainly, much older than Rome. Rome comes into being, in the 7th century, and Egypt goes back, goes back beyond the 30th century BCE. This is, the Eastern Mediterranean, moreover, is not only the cultural center of the world, but the economic center. Much more wealth is in the Eastern Mediterranean, much more capability for generating Roman military power. This is going to become very important later in the story of the Roman world. The Western Mediterranean has always been a backwater. And so even though Rome is a powerful city, it's the only powerful city in the West. And the strength of the Roman Empire is kind of lopsided. Rome's domination of the Mediterranean has a great deal to do with their ability to control the economy and ensure the stability of the Eastern Mediterranean under Roman dominion. So on the one hand, this is Antony looking very far ahead to a Rome that is situated in the East. Perhaps it's unfair to give him credit for being that far-sighted, but so this is one thing about Antony that it plays directly into Octavian's hands for two reasons. First of all, Octavian, the more Antony talks about and situates himself in the East and makes himself at home in Alexandria, the more Octavian is able to play on Antony's decadence and un-Romanness. He calls upon those visceral Roman ideas from the beginning of the Roman story, that all that Eastern decadence is corruption, and to be a true Roman is to be austere and self-sacrificing, and rejection of ostentation and leisure and splendor. And ostentation, leisure, and splendor is what the Egyptians are all about in the Roman mind. Antony is dissolving himself into that. He's assimilating into Eastern opulence and thinking of himself in terms of Eastern despotism, all of which is what the Romans had fought against in taking on the Seleucids and the Ptolemies and the Macedons. The Romans had presented themselves as liberators against the despotism of the Hellenistic empires. Now Antony is subscribing to that, is going over to that way of thinking. Octavian is able to paint Antony as losing his Romanness, as immersing himself in Eastern in the swamps of Eastern morality. More than this, there's a very clear demonstration that of Antony betraying Rome, which is that Antony, even though he's married Cleopatra and become essentially the consort, if not the king of Egypt, Antony was already married. He was already married to a very nice Roman lady. In fact, he was married to a woman who is presented to the Romans as a paragon of the Roman matron. Her name is Octavia, and she is Octavian's sister. And so Octavia is very well known. She has a reputation for being, for being the ideal matron, of being, straightforward and wise, and vocal, and dedicated, and she had already shown her grasp of a matron's responsibility by ensuring the raising the future, not only of her family with Antony, but Antony's previous family through his previous wife. She had raised Antony's children with Fulvia, and so now this idealized and ideal Roman matron, the prototype, the exemplar of what it means to be Roman, on the feminine side. Octavia is being brutally cast aside in favor of a decadent Eastern queen. And so Octavian already has the name. He has the social inheritance of Julius Caesar, but what really allows him to come ahead and gain the hearts and minds of the masses and the military is that Octavian is able to demonstrate that he is a true Roman, and that his goal, his entire being, is about the restoration of Rome as it should be, but without recourse to everything that the Optimates had done wrong. The Optimates themselves had lost sight of what the true Roman was, and so even though Octavian had overthrown the Republic in a sense. The Octavian's presence is as a man who embodies the principles of Roman virtue. So all this comes to a head, when Antony finally decides that he must eliminate the threat posed by Octavian, and so he and Cleopatra put together an armada to attack the Romans. They know that Rome itself is only reluctantly a naval power, and that Octavian has little experience in this, so they feel that this is very possible, very, very, very likely to succeed. But Octavian has enough time to plan. He is able to put together an armada of his own. He has the faith and trust and loyalty of the people that are fighting for him, and he has Agrippa, who has a brilliant sense of how to conduct warfare, not only at land, but, as it turns out, at sea. And so at the Battle of Actium, even though the odds seem to favor Antony at first, the battle turns in Octavian's favor in a very decisive way. And at a certain point, when it becomes clear how the battle is going to turn out, Cleopatra sees that the Battle of Actium is unsalvageable and turns around and sails away. And the story goes that Antony sails after her. And this leaves the Antonine forces with no leadership. The Battle of Actium is then quickly concluded with the remaining ships of Antony and Cleopatra either seized or destroyed. And so at this point, this is the end of the story. Octavian becomes the last warlord standing. Antony doesn't survive much longer than this through a sort of a fluke, and Cleopatra herself commits suicide rather than being paraded through the streets of Rome in Octavian's triumph. Instead, an effigy of her, complete with the poisonous snakes, is paraded through Rome on a float instead. Octavian becomes the last man standing. He becomes the pillar on which the Roman Empire rests, and it's at this point that that we can ask ourselves, okay, so the Republic begins at a very specific moment. It begins with the exile of the Tarquins. That's dated, according to the Roman calendar, 509 BCE. The beginning of the Republic is a very cut and dried moment. But when does the Republic end? And there are a number of problems with this. One is, Octavian takes power in a very gradual way, starting with the Triumvirate, but, even after the defeat of Antony, even after Actium, it's still done in stages. But more than this, well, what is the Republic? If the Republic is the way things had operated, when Rome is in its prime, and the consuls have the authority, and the Senate is in this advisory position of auctoritas, and everything is running smoothly, and there's no this is the ideal operation of the Roman Republic. Well, that hasn't been that way in a long time. And so, you can sort of make a game. When does the Republic end? And you can position it in 10 different places over the course of the collapse of the Republic. Starting with the assassination of the Gracchi, all the way up to the taking of the title of Augustus. There's a 100-year span here in which the Republic has been falling apart over and over again. The one solution to this problem is, so you can pick your own favorite and decide, okay, well, here's where the Republic isn't a Republic anymore. It could be, Sulla's dictatorship, or, it could be, Pompey rolling back Sulla's, constitution, or it could be Kaiser crossing the Rubicon, or it could be, Kaiser's assassination, and, the fact that things aren't restored after that. You could pick, a dozen different places. There's a book called Roman Republics by Harriet Flower, which essentially is talking about how there are, there's a Roman Republic, and then, there's a different thing that's also the Roman Republic, and then, there's another different thing that's also the Roman Republic. There's all of these different stages, and in fact, what we've been talking about from the beginning of the course is that is that Rome is constantly. The Republic in particular is a very organic thing. It's in motion for its entire history. It's not that it's a solid state up until Tiberius Gracchus is killed, and then everything starts to devolve into chaos. The Republic is constantly transforming. In the 5th century, it's one thing. In the 4th century, it's something else. In the 3rd century, it's something else. The 2nd century, and so what we're seeing now is that these new republics are forming more and more rapidly, until finally we get to this point where the republic is deliberately superseded by a different solution, which is itself based on the republic. Octavian says that he restores the republic, and this in itself is an interesting statement because it's not something that you can simply deny. The principate, the form of rule that Octavian develops after Actium, the principate is something that is rooted in republican principles, even though its emergence completely destroys the last vestiges of the Roman Republic itself. And this is what we'll be talking about next week. Until then, that's that.